Well, I will call the meeting to order. The first item on the agenda is to approve last meeting's minutes. Did everybody get a chance to go through those if they wanted to?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
There's a motion to approve the minutes. Is there a second?
I'll second
A motion and a second. All those in favor of approving the minutes say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. All right, moving on to the agenda for today. Does anyone have any revisions or changes they'd like to make?
Can't remember what the agenda was. I pulled it up here. There you go, thank you. So is Kevin going to be with us?
By phone,
By phone, yes.
Yep.
Good.
Whether I catch him in the office or out.
Okay, everything looks good to me, so I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
There's a motion to approve the agenda. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
There's a motion and a second. All those in favor of approving the agenda say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Hearing none, motion carries. Next item on the agenda is to discuss the home rule charters that Candy was so nice to get out to all of us. Did everybody get a chance to look through those and get some good inspiration about, you know, what is possible through a home rule charter?
Yes, I did.
Did we, there were three that we had from you, Candy, right? Stutzman, Walsh, Steele, was it four?
Oh,
No, there's more than that.
Was there more than
no. I
that?
had Richland and.
Oh, here's Williams, okay.
Steele, James South,
Steele,
Yeah.
Stutzman.
5, 6, 7.
In all honesty, I was, yeah,
There's
there's
10.
10 of them.
Oh, okay,
So I tried to scope through as many as I could, and I was trying to note differences between the different ones, just for,
Okay,
you know.
Richlands. Okay,
Yeah,
Walsh.
and we based ours off of, if I remember right, Richlands, I think.
Yeah.
When they originally scoped ours, you know, way back when, so. But there's some interesting stuff that Richland has that, like, for instance, Cass doesn't have, and vice versa.
Well, I think that the thing that occurred to me over and over as I was reading through these is, you know, how much is on the table as far as making it a unique document.
Yes.
You know, these are not cookie cutter necessarily.
No, not at all. Yeah, like Richlands, for instance, they basically, they make all of the offices, other than the ones they have to have elected, you know, appointed. But then they delineate that only the auditor has to be an appointed position.
So functionally, does that mean that it could be an either or proposition? Is that like either appointed or elected, or
No,
is
functionally, it's an appointed position, but they don't, there's no, and then it gives the county commission the ability to delineate any county departments as they determine going forward. So I don't know, does Richland have a recorder still, and,
It's my understanding that the recorder works under the auditor.
okay?
yeah, so,
So it sounded to me like the auditor was the one who appoints those other positions.
So
Yeah.
really, in Richland's case, it's more like the auditor's administrator.
essentially, yeah, it's almost like it's like they're administrator, basically. The commissioners select the auditor, and the auditor does basically everything else, other than they determine the departments, obviously. But it's kind of interesting, that's how it's set up.
Under Richland too, it says requires commission to create and maintain a 5-year capital program for the county.
I like that idea a lot. I like doing a little bit of forward thinking. One of the things that comes to mind with respect to that, and you know, we do business the way we do business, but when we passed the budget and we cut taxes by, what was it, 8.5%?
Yeah, it was in that range.
Something like that, but then we burnt through a lot of our reserve funds to accomplish that.
Yeah.
So, in my mind, while it's good that we cut taxes, I wish that we could have, looking back on it, found a middle ground where, because what will happen is that going into the next budget cycle, we're gonna go right back up. You know, and I think having a little bit of stability might be valuable, because people care a little bit when you cut taxes by 8.5%, but they care a lot when they go up by 10.
I like the idea of doing a capital improvement concept for like a 5-year budget, but we gotta be, if we wanted to include something like that, we would have to be careful about how long of a lookout you wanna put on it.
Right.
I think,
Simply
I think
because
five
the
would be
legislature,
max.
right, the
Yeah.
legislature comes in every 2 years and they can completely upend the apple cart.
right,
You know, we have no clue what the legislature's gonna do in 19 at this point, so the 20 budget, it's really tough to, to look out and go, what are we gonna do in 20, other than we can at least long-term plan, what capital improvements we wanna look at on the courthouse, or what capital, do we wanna, a vehicle rotation in terms of replacement or something like that, we could at least have an idea of the structure.
and I think, there might be sort of a hybrid approach that would be appropriate, where you could sort of have a solid plan for each biennium, so that once you know what the state is, that's kind of the plan, and then out beyond that, maybe you go 3 or 4 years, and the things that are beyond the 2 years when it's, renewed basically, those would be sort of items that we hope to accomplish, right? That'd be a little bit more hopeful.
Yeah, well, it would be essentially, we would be asking every department to almost do a 5-year plan, just like we asked like Kevin does a 5-year road plan,
Right.
and I think that's but we move the road plan every year, we update it, we look at it, depending upon,
Well, and it's not
Resources
like
and
you have to
structure.
follow,
No.
it's not like it's not amendable later,
Right.
but
Of course.
it gives a certain amount of continuity between, between commissions and between people that come into a position, so that, should say, the auditor end up being replaced with someone, they don't have to come in and say, okay, what was this office attempting to accomplish?
Yeah.
Where was it going? And whether or not they choose to follow that then thereafter would be sort of up to them and the commission that was sitting at the time, but at least it would give some sense
Got
for
it.
it. Right.
yeah, Richland seems to have a lot more
Meat.
delineation than
Yeah.
even like Cassidy does.
Well, and I thought that gases was interestingly vague and opaque in certain parts.
Yeah,
You know,
I think it's that
By
way, I
design.
think it's that way by design, yeah.
right.
Like, for instance, if you look at Richlands versus Casses, where they talk about a collection of taxation, they delineate all of the possible taxation forms in Richlands, where in Cass counties, it's just, we can levy taxes.
Right.
Which in all honesty doesn't make a huge difference, but they're trying to leave it opaque almost to a point.
Right, with the idea being that their charter would then encompass all of the legal
Yeah, any-
options.
Yeah,
right?
essentially by not delineating them, you're saying any option is available to us at the time that's legal.
So, right.
Other than they cap themselves at 75 mils in Cass.
Yeah, but gas, that's a lot.
Yeah, but it's all equalized accordingly, everything that they do there is bigger than what we do on our, vacant dues. How many employees does the auditor's office have in Cass County? Probably 30.
Oh,
Yeah, but I don't think we can compare our charter to Cass County, because we aren't anywhere near that.
Yeah.
And we gotta remember that.
Sure.
Yeah, that's why I think when they constructed the original charter, they kind of used Richland as a guide, because, they're kind of similar, at least in size to us. I mean, not tax dollars collected, obviously, because they're in the valley, but.
But one thing that would be nice, not necessarily to try to copy, Cass in terms of grandeur with respect to what we hope to accomplish through any of these taxes. So something that's nice about being flexible is, if in 20 years, Devil's Lake is a boom town with 40,000 people in it, I mean, you may need a little bit more flexibility, otherwise you're gonna be taking this back to work people to amend it as needed,
At least 3 of these were put in place for jail construction.
Gordon Burley and, I don't know, what's the third one?
Williams?
Oh, really? I guess I didn't realize that.
Was it? But I'm not sure, I think it's Williams though.
I wouldn't be surprised.
But with the looming likelihood that Ramsey County may be the sole owner proprietor of the jail here, it's not too far off the horizon that we're going to need to be doing large capital improvements that right now don't fall anywhere within the county budget to do. And so that's going to be a cost, because at this point it's been a discussion that's happened here in the commission, and it's been a discussion that's been happening on other forums. But sooner or later, there's only so much that you can keep doing as far as rehabilitation to the structure that exists. And then at that point, it will be time to either decide whether or not we start wanting to ship our inmates somewhere else, or if we want to have a new facility. And something like this, if written in a sort of flexible manner, could give more options. Because at this point, if we don't have the ability to tax to raise the revenue, then the only thing we really could do is bond the debt. But that's not necessarily a good thing either, because then that means that a portion of the county budget is going to pay interest for years and years and years. And that comes to be a lot of money.
Well, in our structure currently, you'd have to bond debt to pay for property taxes. I mean, it's the only way you can do it.
But then you're handcuffing the county bottom line for years to paying that interest.
Yeah, basically you're saying that for the next 20 years, we're gonna have to set aside a particular portion of this budget off of property taxes. I mean, you take away a lot of your flexibility, that's for sure.
To give everyone here a sense of it, one of the first things that I did when I was elected was I went and I talked to Lisa and I asked to see all of Ramsey County's bonded debt. And at one point, I think we have like what, 10 million in bonded debt, is that right?
I don't recall, something like that.
Approximately $10 million. But in the way that we bonded for it, you can pay some of that off early. So you can call in the bonds and stop paying the interest. And I brought it to the attention of this commission that in 2021, the first bonds that we have are available to be called. And if we called those, the first time that we were able, over the next 10 years, you're saving more than $100,000 in interest. So I mean, you're talking about potentially adding a part-time salary person at that amount of money, each year that we just don't have because we're feeding interest.
Right. Have they done that in the past? Or have they tried that in the past?
What's that?
Calling the bond?
Well, so as far as I know, there's nothing else that Ramsey's bonded for, at least not in recent history,
That you know.
that we would be aware of. But when I brought it up, to call in those bonds and to pay them off, because the thing is, we're gonna have to pay them off in 2030. So it's like, we're gonna have to find this money sooner or later. But the benefit of finding it sooner is that you save on the interest, but it's gonna still end up costing, when those come due, hundreds of thousands of dollars that we have to pay back in principal, or else the county is in default. So it's sooner or later we have to face those expenses too. And if we are proactive in the way that we face them, we save the county money.
How are the bonds structured? Are they
Yeah.
structured, we're making a payment every year and then a balloon payment at the end?
That's right. Well, so basically what
By calling it, we're paying the principal off.
That's right,
We're
yeah.
just buying the bond.
Right, so,
The county's holding the bonds?
no, so they're
Well, no,
municipal
they're-
bonds.
the
So
they're
they're owned
muni bonds.
by, they're owned by
somebody
anybody.
else.
I mean, they're owned
They're all-
by
Yeah,
private
basically.
citizens, they're owned by banks, they're owned by all kinds.
Basically, we sold bonds and we said, we'll give you 3% or 4% or whatever the rate was at that point if you give us cash for the next 30 years.
Right,
Okay.
that's
So
what
they're
happens
receiving an interest payment every year.
from Ramsey County.
But with the express consent that we can call the bond after 20 years of the bond or 10 years of the bond.
Right,
or
so that's what it
whatever
is.
they
It's
are.
like
That's
a 30-year bond,
And then
but
they
you
get all
can
their
call
money
them
back and
in
then, yeah.
at 20 years.
we
So
call it.
sooner or later, we do need to pay everyone back their principal that bought
We're
Ramsey County
slowly
bonds.
doing it now.
Well, no, we're not, because none of our bonds have come due.
But they will in,
Because on a bond, you don't pay back principal until the end.
Well, that's a good point.
So basically what ends up happening is it's not like a loan. So we're not paying it down over time. It's when the bonds mature, or when we call them, we will be responsible for paying the full face value of the bond.
Is that how that works?
Yep.
I'm gonna trust you, even more about bonds than myself.
I think that's what all that studying I did taught me. But so the point is that this isn't this isn't even a choice. You know, we are held to this, and sooner or later, we're gonna have to find the money for it.
What was the total amount you said you had in bonds?
I should go find it.
10, you said.
I think it's 10 million is what we bonded
And
for.
pretty much most of that was used during flood times for road construction, emergency, getting roads on the water and things of that nature. Didn't have much of a choice.
And the bonds themselves mature, I think, over the course of 5 years from, I think, like 2027 to 2030 or 2031. And the biggest sum of that comes due in 2031 at the end.
Mhm.
And you have a list, yeah, you gave me a list of that at one point as well.
And Lisa has.
Yeah, and I have it at home.
Yeah,
So
so,
it's something to think about, there's no doubt about that.
you know, and that's one of those things where if we're talking about potentially having a budget squeeze for the foreseeable future unless oil comes back or, you know, what have you, these are costs that we either kick the can down the road and make hard decisions. One of those hard decisions, and I can imagine this being done if we had to face it right now, is issue more bonds to pay bonds. And that's not a situation you want to be in.
No, I would think that would be a very bad move. But also, this is another reason to create a 5-year capital program or to look at your program going forward.
Right.
I agree. Yeah, if we had to let out more bonds to pay bonds, that's like taking a,
Loans to pay loans.
that's like taking out a home improvement loan and then going and buying a car.
And so that's the problem, and that's why that sort of scares me, is I've seen what the county's bottom line is, and I've seen how much wiggle room we have, and there's not the potential as it stands right now for us to pay these bonds back at the face value that we owe the people that bought them.
Well, and if we call the bonds early, do we have to pay off the full face value of the bond at that point, or can we start
Yes.
paying them off it separately?
Well, so you can call, once bonds become callable, you can call any amount you want,
Yeah.
and any time thereafter.
Yeah, that's
So-
what I'm saying, we could start calling them in 2020, and then we can start
And paying them off a little
incrementally
bit.
paying
And
them,
that- and
we'd
that's-
still save interest, we just wouldn't save the full value of the
That's
interest.
right. No, you've got that right. So that's exactly right.
That's what we'll have to do. And all of a sudden, we'll have to tack in $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year, we'll have to tack 10 mils on the top just because they're paying bonds back.
Right.
And people won't like that very much.
No.
That's probably 10% increase in your taxation right now, because we're only at 85 mils right now.
So I mean, there's just, it's things like that that I see on the horizon, or the cost of the LAC, or, you know, everything else. You know, if we're trying to turn the Lake region, Ramsey County, into the hub that it could be or should be, there are gonna be a lot of costs. And some of those are optional costs that we can pursue at a later date if we want to. Some of those are fixed, and they're gonna come up. I mean, and I think that the LAC and these bonds fall into that category. That they're coming whether we want them or not.
And financial flexibility is going to be something we need too, I think, because like you said, if oil doesn't come back, the state's gonna keep pushing costs on top of us mandated. And we're gonna have to make some really tough decisions on how we're going to fund certain things, because the state's not gonna come up with the money. I don't know if it's truth or not, but I've heard some inkling that they're already talking, we're gonna have to take an additional $700 million off the top in 19.
Which wouldn't surprise me at all.
Which, if we have to take an additional $700 million, they're gonna have to take it out of K-12, they're gonna have, and then they'll just have to push it back on everybody else. I mean, well, we talked about, like, the extension agent, for instance, already. They're talking at least a 5.3% increase to the counties in cost in 19, but that's only for a single agent, we carry 2. So if we wanted to keep Brenda's position, and that's how I understand it, we're gonna be looking at approximately a $100,000 increase in budget just to keep them.
In 19.
In 19.
In 19, right?
Yeah, because Brenda's salary plus her benefits are probably 75,000, I would guess, once you figure it all in,
I'm sure.
if not more. But that's something that I'm hoping I'm right on in how I'm interpreting what they're attempting to do. Well, there's counties right now, like Williams, for instance, I just read, they don't even have a county agent, because Extension doesn't have the budget to hire anybody.
But they're required to have access to one, is that?
Yes, they're required to have access, but they're not required to have one.
So basically you'd be
So
looking at,
they're getting covered by the surrounding counties at this point. And Williams wants to hire a county agent, Extension said, we just do not have the money. They have to wait for somebody else to retire to take those dollars and roll them over. That's how tough it's getting right now. So, that's something we're gonna have to deal with as a county, because we kinda like our county agents around here. So we'd like to keep them if we can.
Well, and I mean, I think that it's pretty,
Need them.
right.
Yeah,
Well, I
they do
mean,
a lot of
by
stuff.
by law, you actually do need to have one here, just like a VSO officer.
Yeah, well, you
Or
can share.
Or access to
Yeah,
one,
you
right?
can-
So
you can
we
share.
share our VSO person with Nelson and Benson.
But, and Jeff made mention of it yesterday, that you can share a county agent, because they do that in system right now. Some of the western counties do share a county agent, so I think that's where they're pushing. They're gonna try to get some of these smaller counties outliers to try to start sharing county agents to save dollars too.
You know, and that may save dollars, but then that comes at the cost of like a Ramsey County taxpayer, right? I mean, because all of a sudden, you've got the same number of employees now covering four times the geographical area, 3 times the geographical area.
Plus your service in your counties that don't have an agent on site is gonna suffer. There's just
Yeah.
no way around it. Plus if you're sharing like Ramsey to Nelson or something like that, it's gonna be less time for that agent to spend in Ramsey County and get the work done there.
That's exactly what I'm saying. So the point is that with the things that we can see on the horizon, on the state level, on the county level, I mean, we're gonna need to have some flexibility to raise revenue. And that's really a lot of what this is about. I mean, I don't wanna give anybody the impression that I'm sitting here thinking that we need to hire 100 more county employees and it's gonna be this great grand imperial experiment. It's,
No, I think it's more just a matter of, we have to have the ability as a county to deal with the things that are going to be thrust upon us without anything, without any of our saying, essentially. You know, it's gonna be interesting to say the least, I think, is basically what we're getting at.
so again, I think that just,
Hopefully I'm not in this chair at that point. I'm at home, and I can throw some tomatoes at people or something.
that's right, you can show up and start catcalling.
Let's see.
So, I know we sort of stepped off of the point of the agenda that we were on, which was looking at the current home rule charters that are in effect around the state. Are there any other thoughts or anything that people would like to point out about any specific charter, things that they felt might be appropriate for Ramsey County or inappropriate for the county?
Well, I was looking at Steele County, and gotta find it now.
I need to do a little bit of fun things. No. Well, I just gotta buy some of those at Walmart or something where you take it off the side, so
Color
you can like
and-
put Steel County on it.
That would be good, I need to do that too. Okay, run, do that right after this?
Yeah, actually, I might do. Oh, it's fine, I'll do it. But
Okay.
I need to do that so I can find those. Yeah, I need some tab.
Let's see, I gotta figure out where it's at.
Yeah, essentially this, yeah, that's what I need. I just haven't taken the time to do that yet. Here's your fancy little U card thing.
Yeah, it's in Steele County where there's sales tax imposed, it says. And they, I guess tangible property, goods, wares, and they were even talking about, school, basketball games and ticket admission, amusement, entertainment, athletic events.
What are your thoughts on that?
I don't think that's right.
Okay.
What page of the Steel Charter?
It's at the end. After-
It's
it
one
looks like
of
it's an
three on
amendment.
205, 2005,
Yeah,
Nathan.
yeah, one more page. It's right back.
Oh, back here,
Yeah.
okay.
Imposition of sales and use
It
tax.
looks like it's an amendment.
Yeah, it must be an amendment.
I think it was a 1% sales tax for a road levy or total tax levy for road construction or maintenance.
Yeah, it's completely for roads.
Yeah,
Yeah, I've talked with, I know Randy Richards, who's on the Steel County Commission fairly well, and asked him how it's kind of functioning for them, and they're all, I don't know about how it, but he said in terms of the.
But I mean,
budgeting-
because I was just reading through and that kind of stuck out to me that,
Well, and see, and so that wasn't in their original charter, that was something that they passed afterwards as an amendment to their charter.
what was the adopted.
Yeah, it seems kind of odd that you would delineate something like that. It would be, I mean, in my thought, a sales tax on something would be, you know, any place where there's a point of sale essentially right now, you know, like, because I don't, does the school have to pay sales tax on like ticket receipts, gross receipts and things like that? They're a
I
tax
don't think
exempt
they do when
entity.
they buy merchandise, I don't think
Not-
school pays tax,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
but then why should the party that's going to a basketball game?
Yeah, that's what I mean. So if there's a Firebirds basketball game and they collect $5,000 at the gate, for instance, they don't have to report that to the state and then pay sales tax on the receipts, do they? I
Well,
would
I mean,
assume
I
they're a
guess
tax
that's,
free entity.
I mean,
Yeah, but if they're in Steele County, apparently they have to.
well, I mean, it's there.
Yeah, it's strange.
But I'm not sure that, are we sure that this is specifically for school related? Because I don't see, I see where it says tickets and admissions, but I mean, that may be to concerts or things like that.
Well,
Yeah, that's interesting though.
athletic activity,
But I agree with you, I don't know how they could, you know, levy it if the state, if they're exempt on the state.
Well, that's the thing is there's a certain collection method from the state.
Right.
So I've always just assumed, I guess, and it's my assumption, but, you know, if Ramsey County, for instance, were to impose a sales tax, we'd only be able to impose a sales tax where it's collectible currently.
Right.
You know, because there's state sales tax that's collected. So that's the avenue you have to use, you know, you couldn't set up another avenue on how you have to do it, you know. Because that's how the city derives their sales tax.
Right. They collect it on, they piggyback off the state sales
Yeah,
tax.
the state collects their 5% and then the city gets derived its, whatever they're at, 2% I believe right now, and then it gets sent back out from the state to the city quarterly. It would be a similar fashion here, but, yeah, it's interesting.
Did we need to, it's past 2:15, did we need to call?
I would, yeah.
I guess we kind of blew right past that.
Yeah, I don't know, if you guys want to move closer.
Yeah, do you guys,
so that
I
you
mean,
can
there's enough seats for
Don't hear that way, they can hear you.
This thing is not very good, so if you have questions, you'll have to walk up.
Well, and
Or if you
there's,
don't
like,
hear.
that thing right there is the speaker,
Right, but
you know? So if you guys want to move closer so that,
I'm fine,
you're okay,
I'm good here.
Linda Ledbetter was their county auditor.
we're gonna try work first.
Do you want to switch spots with me, Lucas, so that they can hear you? He can
was
hear
this the
you.
speaker?
Yeah, I don't know how good it is, put it right, just talk right into it.
Burley County, this is Karen.
Hi, is Kevin in?
Sure, one moment.
Yeah, then I don't have to call his cell phone. Hi, Kevin, it's Candy with Ramsey County.
Yeah, I was just on the line with your office, so if
Oh.
someone's coming to ask.
Yeah, we got sidetracked, sorry.
Okay, well, I was just making sure, because I wanted to move to something else.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be in the middle of something else when you called, so.
Yeah,
Alright,
sorry,
good.
sorry about that, Kevin. Do you still have a few minutes to talk with us?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Looking
well,
forward to it.
we'll go around the room and introduce ourselves. I'm Lucas Wakefield, and I'm the chairman of the Home Rule Committee and county commissioner for Ramsey County.
I'm Adam Lightbon, I'm also a Ramsey County Commissioner and I'm on the Home Rule Committee.
Do you want us to shout?
Oh, you wanna?
And then we have two other members who are not sitting very close to the speaker, and that would be Paula Visted, and she's the head of the Chamber of Commerce, and Rodney Brown, who's a longtime resident and you know, farmer and landowner in Ramsey County.
Is that everybody?
That'd be it for today.
Bye.
And so I guess what we wanted to talk with you about, Kevin, was just how Burley County's home rule charter operates and how you feel it functions for the county.
Okay. Just a little background on myself. I'm the auditor treasurer. I was elected auditor in 1986, started in 1986. vote to combine the auditor and treasurer's office, and that passed by, I want to say 72% in favor. So in 2002, we combined the two offices along with the tax equalization director's office. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I want to say it was in about 1994, 92. It was somewhere in the 90s, dating myself. The county, Burley County formed a Home Rule Charter Commission, drafted a charter, put it on the ballot, and it lost by about 300 votes. So that was, I want to say, in the 90s, mid-90s when that happened. It was a very close vote. In 2014, probably in 2013, a Home Rule Charter Commission was formed. It was a number of, there were 2 county commissioners and 3 others on the commission. What came out of that Home Rule Charter Commission was a very, very, very limited Home Rule Charter with only one power. And that's the power to levy a sales tax up to a half-cent sales tax to pay for a joint Burley and Morton County detention center. At the same time, Morton County went through the same process, but their charter is somewhat more broad and more powerful than the Burley County charter is. Personally, I think we missed the boat. I think the real reason, the only reason Burley County has a home rule charter is for the half-cent sales tax to fund our new jail. I wish it was much broader than that.
Kevin, yeah, go ahead and tell us some of the things that you wish that would have been included. Can you expand on that?
Absolutely. You know, if you look at the definition of home rule, it's local control over local issues. And I served as staff for the Charter Commission, and, you know, I've been through it once before. Our first charter was much broader, and one thing I really pushed for was the ability for ordinances and the initiative and referral of ordinances. You county commissioners know, without a home rule, I mean, there's very little you can do, right?
Right.
Yes.
You have zoning ordinance authority, but other than that, you don't have, I mean, there's very little you can do. Correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, I'm going to use fireworks. I mean, another dry year, the county commission, the county gets inundated by rural residents wanting fireworks banned. Have you experienced that?
I guess we haven't had any dry years recently.
But I mean, and I'm not saying that it could be enforced, but that's just an example. The city of Bismarck has a pretty broad home rule charter. A lot of the cities do, and cities can do ordinances. I'm going to give a couple examples. Many years ago, during the winter months, so as many years ago, residents came to the Bismarck City Commission and said, they got snow gates in Minot. Do you know what snow gates are on the plows?
Yep.
Okay? We want them in Bismarck. They're an awesome thing. When nobody likes the snowplow to go by and, you know, fill their driveway full of snow, and then you wake up in the morning and it's like concrete, right? So Minot put snow gates on their snowplows, and the residents in Bismarck came to the city commission and said, we want snow gates, and the city commission says, no, we're not going to do it, we don't think they work, they're too expensive, and gave a whole bunch of reasons for not doing it. A group of residents in Bismarck initiated an ordinance to require snow gates. So they they initiated through a petition, and the city of Bismarck, the city commission, commission then at the time got snow gates. The best thing since sliced bread, a lot of people think. Now, of course, in the rural areas, they don't work, because, you gotta do with that snow, you gotta push it, blow it as far as you can into the ditch, whatever. But that's an example of being able to initiate an ordinance. Okay? Now, the referral side, I'll give an example, and this one is somewhat more recent, 2011. Before the state legislature passed the laws that you couldn't smoke in public places, remember we used to be able to smoke in bars?
Yep.
Right? So in Bismarck, the Bismarck City Commission decided must have been in 2010, whatever, that they were gonna pass an ordinance to prohibit smoking in bars. Okay? So they did. A group of bar owners and one of the big pushers behind it was the local amusement company that sold the dart games and the pinball machines and the pool tables. They were behind it too. And they went out and they've got the required number of petitions, and they referred that city commission ordinance. And so it couldn't go into effect until it would not go into effect until there was a special election. So the city commission here in Bismarck could have said, well, the people have spoken, they've referred our ordinance, and then it's done. You can still smoke in bars. But the city commission said, no, we really believe in this smoking in bars, so they called a special election. And that was held in March of 2011. I remember because I ran the election for them. And the people of Bismarck came out and they voted to approve, to uphold the ordinance. So it was shortly after that there was no smoking in bars in Bismarck. So I use those two examples because I think those are pertinent examples, and I think they show what the ability to do ordinances can do, on both sides. If the citizens of Ramsey County want something done, they can go to the county commission and through the ordinance procedure, the commission can draft an ordinance and can adopt an ordinance. And if the people don't like it, they can refer it. If a group of people want something and the county commission won't do an ordinance, they can initiate the ordinance. And to me, I think those are very important powers to give your citizens. And it's something that I wish we had. Again, we did. I mean, it's annual, every year we get requests to ban, the county commissioners get requests to ban fireworks. And they say we can't do ordinances. We don't have the power to do ordinances without a home rule charter. Now, whether or not we could ever enforce a fireworks ban is one thing, but that's just an example. The other thing it's been something that I've been interested in almost since right after I was elected, is the structure of county government. And I really think any home rule charter should provide for the ability for, whether it's the county commission or the residents of the county, to be able to make county government more professional, more efficient, and more effective. And this isn't anything new. I can show you newspaper articles from 1992 where I said the structure of county government is archaic. We don't need all the elected officials that we have. And some will agree, some will disagree, but I did I got my master's degree in public administration, and that was basically my thesis, was, improving the form and structure of county government and how we operate as counties. things have come a long way since I started, in the fact that we used to have elected county superintendents and, county superintendents of school and county, the public administrators were elected and so on and so forth. And I look at it, the other forms of local government, whether it be city or schools. I mean, we don't elect your business manager or your superintendent of your school district. You find and hire the most qualified applicants. So those are some things. I mean, I can't really give you from Burley County and how our charter works. Our charter works one way, and that gives us the ability to collect a half-cent sales tax to fund the bonds that we sold, the borrowing that we did to construct the new detention center.
Sure, and I think that your perspective has actually been very, very valuable in saying that you wish that the scope of the charter had been broader. And a lot of the things that you brought up as ways that you see a home rule charter being of benefit have been some of the things that we've been discussing in this committee and trying to understand whether or not that's just a idea on the horizon or something that's actually achievable and worth pursuing.
Well, I think they're very much worth pursuing, and the feeling here in Burley County back in 2014 was that if we make this charter too broad and people don't understand it, and people think the ability to create ordinances gives the county commission too much power, and if you're going to take our elected officials away from us, then we don't understand this charter, then we're going to vote no. And by voting no, then we lose the funding mechanism for this new jail that was, at least the commission felt was needed. So I think that's the real reason why it was so limited, was for the fear that if we do a broad charter and people, the people don't understand it, they're going to vote no. So I think if you have the opportunity, depending upon what the motivation is for the home rule charter, if you have the opportunity to at least draft it broadly, and then once you get to your public hearings, you can always scale it back if need be.
Sure, and I think one thing I'd like to ask you, Kevin, is don't you feel that that's kind of the onus of this committee is to try to get people to understand what you're trying to accomplish and why, and that would be our failing if the vote didn't pass because people were afraid that it was something that it was not.
Right. Well, I would agree. When we lost the first time, it was the rural-urban split was huge. It passed in the urban areas, and it failed in the rural areas I don't remember exactly, but of course, but the rural areas, the no vote was huge. And in the urban areas, the yes vote prevailed, but not enough to make up the difference. And so I guess we didn't do a good enough job in the rural areas. I mean, the rural people were afraid we were going to take away their elected officials and give too much power to the county commission.
But don't you feel with the ability to refer ordinances and to actually put things on a ballot, don't you feel like that gives a certain amount of power back to the citizens themselves?
Absolutely. Absolutely. But again, I don't think that's the education and outreach that you're going to have to do to get them to understand that. I just think the ability to do ordinances, number one. So if something comes up 10 years from now that we don't even think of today, that your county commission can do something, to fix or to promote or whatever needs to be done. And right now, County Commission, your hands are tied, our hands are all tied by what the law allows us to do. And with the ability for the commission to do ordinances, that gives power to the commissioners. You know, and if the commissioners, you know, take too much power, then the citizens can refer it. And if the county commissioners don't want to do their jobs, so to speak, then the citizens can initiate an ordinance. And so that's why, for years, I've used the two examples, at least one example of the snow gates, because, wow, I think snow gates are great. Every morning when I get up and I don't have to, you know, shovel out my double driveway because it's been plugged with snow. And smoking in bars, one I think is a great example too of what the city commission did, and the people, some of the people thought the city commission, you know, took too much power. How dare you tell me what I can do and what I can't do? You know. So I really think the initiative and the referral, the ordinance, whole ordinance thing is very, very important for an effective home rule charter.
Sure. Before we let you go, Kevin, because we've already taken up about a half hour of your time, and we really appreciate it, I just want to open it up. You know, does any member of this committee or any of the guests that we have present have any questions that they'd like to ask Kevin while we have him on the phone? No? Okay, Kevin, do you have any final thoughts for us?
No, I enjoy talking about this. So, anytime you have any questions, feel free. I mean, it's important, and again, I was one of the things I worked on, you know, or used through my studies for my master's degree. It's something that I read up on, you know, whenever I get the chance. Something I'm passionate about. So I just want to, if you have any other questions or you know, anything you want to run by me, I'm no expert by no means, but I'd be happy to help you in any way that I can.
Thank you so much, and I really can't express how appreciative we are of you to make that offer to this committee, and as well as giving us your time today to answer our questions and give us some insight into your thoughts and feelings about home rule. I really appreciate it, Kevin.
No problem. It's enjoyable.
Thank you. Okay, well, you have a great rest of your day.
You too.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Yep.
Yep, bye.
Look at you.
I should turn the volume down. That doesn't blow me away the next day.
Any thoughts on the discussion?
Well, I guess I look at it this way, that we've got to come up with a program that's feasible, that we got to sell to the county commissioners. And same in turn, when they get it, they've got to have to be able to sell it to the public. And it's going to take a little time and a little thought to do some of this, and how we want to present it. We want to be in the conservative side, but still we want to be able to take care of things. That's the way I look at it.
And I certainly think that that's a reasonable stance to have. I just found Kevin's point about wanting to make sure that you have the ability to do certain things down the road to be a good point, you know, and so I thought that was really interesting to hear that he wishes that it would be broader, you know, a little bit larger in its ability to have scope and scale. And I think that that's a good point to jump to the next item on the agenda today, which is, what do we want the scope and scale of Ramsey County's home rule charter to look like in an initial, you know, brainstorming session?
Well, taking away from Kevin's comments, I guess I kind of feel similar to him, not completely, but you know, one of my favorite parts of it as well is the initiative and the referral. I feel as though the more power we can give to the residents of the county to tell us that we're doing our job well or we're doing it poorly is a good thing.
Sure.
That's right.
And I think if you're going to adopt it with the ability to do ordinances or sales taxes or anything of that nature, you have to allow the people the ability to tell us, not necessarily me, but whoever the commission's gonna be 10, 15, 20 years from now, we want this or we don't want this. That being said, I think, I agree with the thought process. I think we wanna scope it broadly, but I don't know how, not from the aspect of we wanna muddle it up and say, well, we're gonna put this in and this in and this in and do 3 different things at the same time, because I think that makes selling it a lot harder. If you say, well, we're gonna change offices and we're gonna put a sales tax in and we're gonna do it all at the same time, I think that makes the selling of it a lot harder, whereas if we draft it broadly, but we give the commission and or the people in the county the ability to do those things at a later date, it makes selling it a lot easier. Because you're saying basically we need the ability to be flexible in the future, and that's what this affords us.
So would you say that your thought process is to create a home rule charter that's broad enough to be sort of easily amended, right? I mean, relatively easily amended.
Yeah, yeah.
Not so that it needs to change every day.
Yeah, and my thought would be the ability for taxation, anything like that, has to go before the people. And I think legally that has to, you can't just put a tax, that has to go before the people anyway. But give the county the ability to have the flexibility to say if in the future we have to do something like, not even necessarily replace the jail, but we just have to, if we think that the facility just needs upgrades, there's no possible way we're gonna be able to fit that in our budget just to do an upgrade. To give us the ability to say, hey, we need a 1/4-cent sales tax to bond this over 10 years or whatever. But we'd have to go ask the people for that, but we have the ability to do so. I like the idea of having the ability at the commission level to say, we want the ability to combine offices or, do things with the elected officials, because I almost envision that as you're going to look at those at the times when you have those officials retiring. And then you can look at those things at that point in time. And Katie's in the room, I don't know any idea what your thought process is, but for instance, when Lisa retires, that would be at that point, we would say, okay, do we want to keep a treasurer as an elected office? Or do we want to maybe make the recorder treasurer put it together, and maybe we want to roll the treasurer under the auditor? Because it would make sense to do it at that point in time when you have a retirement, to at least have that discussion. Doesn't mean you have to do anything, but it gives you the ability to have that discussion. And you need to have the flexibility, I think, as a commission to do that through an ordinance structure versus a vote of the people, because otherwise you're going to have to say, well, you're going to retire now, 2 years, 3 years, if you're going to want to be able to go to people to do that at that point in time. I think ordinance probably works a little bit better, because the people still have a say, and if the commission changes it, and the people say, we still want it to be elected, they refer it.
Right.
It still gives them that ability to do so, and say, well, we think you're doing something really stupid here.
And that's something that I personally see as being very valuable, is to have people be able to come before this commission or go to the community and say, hey, the commissioners don't have any idea what they're talking about, and we need this for this community, and that if they've got a better argument, and they've got more brains than we have in this room to do something, then it should be done for the good of the community.
Well, look at how many times initiated measures and referrals happen at the state level because people feel the legislature overstepped their bounds or isn't doing enough. It happens constantly, and that's a good thing. It allows structure for the citizens to say, hey, we really think this is important, and you're either lagging or you're way too far out front of how progressive or we are in terms of wanting to change something. The other thing I would say is, I think it's very important that we discern the numbers and we research it on what level of signatures do you need to initiate or refer. Because there's differences in every one of these charters in terms of how hard do you want to make it. Because if you set that stature too low, you're going to be constantly initiating or referring. But if you set it too high, you make it too difficult for the people to do it. So you gotta kinda look at it and say, you know, it's gotta be hard enough where it's gonna be a little bit of work to do it, but at the same time, not so hard that everyone's gonna go, well, we just can't put the time in to do it. You know, simply because, you know, you don't wanna have to be, you know, fighting about stuff constantly, but if it's important enough that people feel it needs to be taken to task, they feel that it's a capability they can do without, you know, straining themselves too much by forming a committee and.
Right, and I think that makes a lot of sense too.
I don't know where that number is.
There was a, you know, something that we passed around when I was working for the Senate, something that got passed around very regularly was every call and every letter represents 100 people in the state. So if you've got 10 to 20 people that are writing in about something, that means that there are 100 times that number that care about that thing. You know, and it's just that most of the people that care about it don't either have the time or, you know, the ability to send in a letter or to call or to do whatever it is. And so I think that your point is well taken that, you know, while we want to make sure that it's not just, you know, 5 brothers who all decided they want to change something and we're going to, you know, spend a bunch of money to put it on the ballot and a whole bunch of stuff like that. But we also don't want to make sure that, you know, you need to be knocking every door between here and Hamden to get enough signatures. I think.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the different ones. Yeah, like right here, so instance, initiating a measure or an ordinance in Richland County, I believe this is 15% of the number of electors voting in the county for the office of governor in the last gubernatorial election. So in Ramsey County, that would probably be 15% of give or take 4,000 to 5,000, because it's usually right around 5,000 people we have voting in the governor's elections. So, you know, that's a fairly decent threshold. You're gonna have to get 1,000 signatures probably.
Yeah.
But I think that's, you know, I don't know what it is to initiate a refer on the state level. I think that's something we should look at too, because it seems as though, you know, percentages are percentages. And initials and referrals on the state level happen fairly regularly, so it must be but not so regularly that it's crazy, you know. So that maybe is a decent threshold to look at, the percentages, I would think. And like I said, I don't know what a good percentage is, but I think that's a discussion that needs to be had once we look at some numbers.
The other thing, and this is just as a sort of a philosophical point to ask the question is, another thing we need to be concerned about is the tyranny of the majority, which is, you know, it's an old concept that had to do, and it's the reason that the Senate was set up the way the Senate was set up, where every state got two senators, was because the small states, rightly or wrongly, feared that the big states would get their way on everything. And so in our case here in Ramsey County, that means that should all of the city of Devils Lake care to do something, Ramsey County will be dragged along. You know, and that it doesn't matter if it's good or bad for Edmore, it doesn't matter if it's good or bad for wherever, but that is something that we do need to concern ourselves with. You know, if ordinances or measures or all those things inordinately go to the benefit of Devils Lake, then really we've just created another apparatus of the city of Devils Lake.
Well, and in all honesty, I think if you spoke with people out in the countryside right now, they probably feel like we're focusing on Devil's Lake probably too much. In certain avenues.
But then at the same time, 3 out of every 4 residents of this county live in the city. So there is that too, but that doesn't mean that that 4th person that lives in this county has no right to things either. And so that's just the flip side of what we're talking about. As much as you'd like, you know, we like to make sure that the people's voices can be heard, you also should have, hopefully, in a perfect world, the ability to prevent against some of the tyranny of the majority.
Why, if he was so, and maybe, I think it's something that, he was so adamant on thinking that his charter should have more, encompass more, couldn't he make a change to it at this point?
Well, the commission could.
Yeah.
And I don't think that they would even need to bring together another home rule charter commission, right, committee, because that's not required, you just have to get it on the ballot.
That's a good question.
Because could you do substantially an entire home rule charter as an amendment to your original home rule charter?
I was thinking that couldn't he make an amendment to his charter?
Well,
What I
yeah,
was thinking was that.
but he wasn't on the committee at that point in time.
Oh, he wasn't on
No,
the
he
one where
was
they
not.
made the
No,
sales tax on the jail?
the committee they had that structured the home rule charter in 2014 very rigidly was 2 commissioners and 3 members of the public.
Oh, not himself?
He was not himself on it. He was just essentially, yeah, he was
Oh,
taking,
and he said.
he was an ex officio member there just for,
Okay.
But do you understand what I'm saying though? Because that just on a very, neither here nor there basis, is it possible that you could pass a home rule charter that was nothing and then have an amendment put before the people that would be the entire charter?
without putting a committee, we'd still have to go through it. I mean, I don't know if you'd have to go through the process of doing this again, but at some point in time, if you had any common sense, I think you would.
Well, I agree common
Simply
sense wise,
be-
so I'm just asking in terms of the law, that it's just.
That's a good question.
Say we wrote a home rule charter, so I was thinking to his point, obviously, he's saying that he agreed with the home rule charter to the point they wrote it for the sales tax for the jail.
Yeah.
But he doesn't agree that it clarified enough for him, it didn't have enough.
It didn't have enough breadth to
Right.
it, that it was.
Not enough teeth, it just.
Yeah, they could amend it at this point,
Right.
but they'd
So-
have to take it before the people in order to amend it.
Why isn't that?
That would be a question for the
Yeah.
commission, I suppose.
So if we write a
yeah.
home rule charter, say, since, say we do it, it passes, it goes through, and then at some point, they're like, oh, you know what, just like he's saying, well, gee, I wish we had done something, blah, blah, blah. It can be amended.
By a simple majority vote of
Of course.
people.
Oh,
Yeah, because like Cass counties, for instance, they adopted theirs in 1994 or something, but it's been amended 3 separate times now.
right.
It was last amended last year, because all they did was simply amended it to stick in, we're gonna use a half-cent sales tax to pay for the diversion. So if we broadly scoped ours, but say, like I'm saying, you try to keep it clean,
So that
without adding in a
passes.
bunch of stuff, you could change things, yes, of
Yeah,
course.
so why, I understand that it has to, that we definitely want to make it right, so it passes. But couldn't we focus more on making it less broad to pass it and then amend it as needed?
You could, it's just then that means that every single, that to me seems almost like a half measure, because it means that any time that something comes up, you still have to be reactive to it,
Right.
And
But-
that's all. I agree that you can go too far in that direction where
Right.
you're planning 50 years ahead and trying to make sure that you're detailing all of that. But I think, if what we're talking about here was like the United States Constitution, right? The United States Constitution was never intended to be the entire codex of laws and regulations for the United States. And because it was so flexible, that's the reason that it has worked. I mean, so that's the idea, is that I think initially the Home Rule Charter should be broad. It should say, this is what we hope we can build upon as we go forward, so that, who knows? Who knows what will come up?
So it should not be so detailed.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah, and that's kind of what my point is that you almost want to just create this as almost like a constitution, a framework of a concept of how the county is going to have powers enumerated going forwards. But then at a later date, if we want to do something like a sales tax or a use tax or change how government structure and function works, that ability is then in this document to go and do it at that point in time. And in all honesty, we might have to do something sooner, we don't know. But it would allow us to have the opportunity through that structure to do it at that point in time.
Right.
Whether it's through ordinance or in a taxation situation, a vote of the people.
It's just another tool to work with.
Yes.
Right.
I like the idea of the fact, when I got on the commission, I wouldn't say naive, but obviously I didn't know everything I know now. You learn something every day in this job. And at that point in time, I was looking at Home Rule 2, and I didn't know if it's something we wanted to do or not, but the more I get into it, the more I realize that sitting on the commission, our hands are tied on a lot of situations. And I don't think that that's a good thing, one, from a commission standpoint, but I really don't think it's fair to the residents of the county that our hands are so tied on things. Because there are things that, from a county aspect, we have to do or have to pay for with certain property taxation that doesn't make sense. For instance, the airport. Somebody that lives, or the library even, the library is probably the best example. I love libraries, but somebody that lives in Hamden or Edmore pays more for the library than somebody that lives in Devils Lake.
Right.
It doesn't make sense. But that's how the structure and function of Century Code sets for levying property taxes. Now, if we had a library in Edmore, we could pay for that out of our property taxes too, but just because of how the county is structured off of Devils Lake as the hub, it's just how it works. You know, so we pay approximately $115,000 as a county to run the library. A citizen in Devils Lake only pays $100,000, and part of that is sales tax, I believe, correct?
Yeah.
So 50% of that is coming from someplace else too. So per capita in Devils Lake, our resident is paying way less for the library than somebody that lives in Edmore or Hampton.
Okay, then in the other sense, then how would you eliminate that under this home rule charter?
If you gave the commission flexibility going forward to possibly say, we want to ask for a 1/4 cent sales tax or something like that, to use that as flexibility to maybe structure it to go towards paying for something like that, or, you know, just the flexibility to do something, where now we don't have that flexibility. We're kind of, so for instance, when budgeting time happens, they come in and say, we need to run the library, and we need X amount of dollars. And the city says, this is what we're throwing in. Then the county basically says, well, if we don't give them money, we gotta shut the doors.
That happens all the time.
And that's on more than, that's multiple things that come before us on these other outside entities that we help fund, but we almost have to, because if we say we're not going to give you a certain amount of mills, you're gonna have to close the doors. So the city essentially is dictating a lot of what we have to do occasionally.
Does the city have a home rule charter?
Yes.
Yes.
And it's very well open, so they've got sales tax, they've got different pots of money to roll with. A lot of the stuff, what they do with their sales taxes, I don't know what the percentage, but they buy down their property taxes essentially with sales tax. Because about 60% of the sales tax revenue in Devils Lake comes from people that live outside of Devils Lake. So they're getting their property taxes bought down, where somebody out in the county doesn't have that capability, because we have one way to do things. So I'm not saying that you want to give the county the ability to just go hog wild with taxation, but it would allow the flexibility to, if you could say, structure it, say, we're gonna get a 1/4 cent sales tax, but we're gonna devote a certain amount of that to a road fund, and a certain amount of that to this, to buy down those mill levies. So you would say, we're using sales tax to buy down property tax.
Right. And then, you know, and there are other things
If you
too.
could structure it accordingly, you know?
Like, let's say that, you know, the county came together and decided that right now they wanted Ramsey County to maintain a public beach on Devils Lake. Right now, we'd have to pay for it using property taxes. If we had a home rule with some flexibility, you could potentially institute a lodging tax, and I would argue that those two things are a lot more closely connected than a property tax is to maintain a public beach. Because if people are coming to enjoy Devils Lake and staying here and utilizing a public beach, then using funds from, say, a lodging tax would make a lot more sense to pay for that public beach than a property tax would.
Well, in all honesty, I personally think like a lodging use tax would make a lot more sense to pay for. For instance, we get a lot of questions from the townships, like going out to Woodland Resort. The Cove is a good example.
Perfect example of something that should be.
Any of those lodging facilities out around the lake where their roads, we have to do a lot of upkeep and maintenance there. And it would make a lot of sense to say, hey, here's what we want to do. We want to put an X amount of tax on top of that, and we're going to devote that specifically towards road upkeep and maintenance into your facilities. Somebody like Kyle, he already booted in $40,000 to get the road done out there, because he knows that quality of that road directly affects people coming out to use his facility.
Well, and I've already discussed the concept with Kyle and with the Mertens boys that do hay bale, and they both said, yeah, go for it. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
Especially if, and one of the things that you know the Mertens has said, which I thought was sort of an interesting thing. And it's not a township road, but they said, well, if if you're gonna pave the Cove Road and then maintain the upkeep of the Cove Road because it services the Cove for the most part, why are we any different? And why shouldn't we have our road paved? And yeah, I mean, there are a couple of rationales for why, but they're not really entirely clear to me. You know, it's sort of, because of the way that the county does business right now, we kind of have to shoot from the hip with everything that we do. And I don't like it. And I don't like that I can't justify or ground what it is that we're doing or how we're doing it in some kind of logic.
Yeah. That. There are many times we have to make decisions in these chairs and it's like, I almost am forced to do it because structure and function dictates that. Yeah, so I mean, it would just give flexibility, and like I said, but it would allow the people to say, you guys are way off base. You know, that's where I like the ability for, and like you said, even if it's an ordinance, you know. We have a liquor ordinance, because I think state century code allows us to do that, along with planning and zoning, and that's about all the ordinances we can have. But, for instance, even in those two ordinance situations, we've got public meetings on them, but if people didn't like we could pass a liquor ordinance that people absolutely hate, and they would have no ability to do anything about it.
Right.
At this current point.
Right. But
Because, you know.
And so there, like another good example of a city ordinance that exists right now is that after a certain time, and maybe it's all day, I don't remember, but you can't drive around, you probably won't get pulled over, you can't drive around and be blasting music out of your vehicle. But if you're driving through Woodland Resort area, that's just as densely populated with people, but there's no recourse for that. We don't have an ordinance that says you can't do it.
There's a sound ordinance.
Yeah, in the city.
In the city, that's what I'm saying. And so it's things like that, where it's simple quality of life things.
Yeah.
I mean,
But again, I want the people to have the ability to say, we don't care about sound, or if that's what their thought process is, you know.
but I'm just saying that if a person did, I mean, I don't live out there, but if I did, I might think about that, and there's nothing I can do about it right now.
Trust me, I think about it too with 3 kids. So each one I woke my kids up, like, come on, help me out here. Yeah, but I guess we're kind of getting off task a little bit, but basically that's where I'm coming from, is just, I think we need to enumerate the powers, but we don't necessarily have to specifically say, we're gonna do this and this and this and this to try to accomplish it, because once you start to do that,
That wouldn't go.
yeah, you're gonna get so muddled up in the details and people are gonna be confused as to how it would work and say, well, so we're voting on combining an office and a sales tax and a use tax, and people would just be like, it's too much. Whereas if we broadly scope it just as an enumeration of powers with the ability for the people to tell the county, you guys are way off base, I think that's something we can sell.
That would have to be all included though, in the whole program, like the elected officers and things like that, in the broad sense.
Yeah, in a broad sense. Yeah, kind of like how, not Richland got rid of offices in theirs, but you would have, like Cass Counties is a good example of how you do that, because it basically says all the elected offices stay in position. But the county can change elected offices through ordinance. You know, it basically enumerates those powers, but it doesn't specifically do it at that point in time.
Doesn't eliminate them.
Yeah, so they laid out those powers in 1994, and they didn't use them until 20 years later. 23 years later, because they actually just went through it, but again, it was at a time where they had 2 of those 3 people retiring, and they looked at it and said, it's a good time to have this discussion. And it made sense to them. And I think that's, you know, kind of how I feel it should happen, but at the same time, since it is an ordinance, if the people of Cass County said, no, we want to keep electing our recorder and our treasurer, they can go out and collect the signatures and they can put it to a vote. And that's how it should be. I mean, because, you know, it's kind of the old concept of, I'm in this chair now and I trust myself, but I don't trust the next guy. There's days I probably don't trust myself either, but you know.
As I look at it, you don't want to do something that, like what you just alluded to, 20 years from now, shoot yourself in the foot.
Exactly.
I agree with you, Rodney.
Yeah, you don't want to give. I don't want to give the commission too much power either, because I want people to tell me I'm doing something wrong.
Right, and if that's, you know, you're elected official, if they don't want you, they're gonna, if you do something that you don't, that's their prerogative.
Yeah. That and they'll get rid of me too, and that's fine. They'll probably get rid of me anyway, but that's okay.
But I think you understand what I'm saying, that
I get where you're coming from. I think we're all kind of on the same page to a point. I mean, there's gonna be little things here and there, but I think we're all kind of feeling the same way. From a standpoint of, you know, clarity, being able to show it to the people and sell it. That's good. Now it's just a matter of really getting down in the weeds and actually putting the thing together. That's what the work's gonna be.
Which is a nice segue, which is to say, we've now gone a little bit, almost an hour and a half.
We've been here for a while.
Time flies when you have fun. So I guess then this might be a good juncture to talk about our next meeting, date and time, as well as to discuss what it is that this committee would like to accomplish at our next meeting.
January, on this little guy in the corner.
Yeah.
Wednesdays work again? Let's see. I'm guessing we want to go into January would be my guess, right?
Oh, probably. Although I also think that at some point, if we're really gonna be talking meat and potatoes of drafting a document, we may need to have a couple of meetings closer together, so that we still have enough time to bring it to a public hearing and hopefully have a couple more meetings with the public to be informational meetings and things like that, to discuss it. I mean, obviously, this is a platform for that, but we don't seem to have very many people jumping up to talk to us about it, so.
Well, the first Wednesday that would make sense, I guess, in my mind in January is the 3rd is right after the New Year, so the, you know,
And the
that gets
next
a little bit hard.
Tuesday is, or Wednesday isn't that when the roundup is?
The 10th would be Roundup Day, yeah, so that probably wouldn't work the best either. Good call on that, Rodney, I wouldn't have thought of that. So if Wednesday is the day that works the best, the 17th would probably be the first date would make sense, but that's already what? That's a long ways out.
That's a whole month away.
Yeah.
More than a month.
But the Wednesdays in December obviously don't work. 13th is next week. The 20th is already right before Christmas and things like that, so people would be traveling. 27th is right after Christmas. I'll be actually gone then. I mean, unless we want to go to a different date. Or, maybe if people think the 3rd would work.
I think it might be reasonable to try to sneak in one more meeting in December. No?
Candy's saying no.
Boss has spoken.
Please no.
Yeah, you got your end stuff to get done, right? Okay. Our first commission meeting will be, do we have one on the 2nd?
Well, I was gonna ask it to be the 3rd.
Okay, so you're talking Wednesday the 3rd then,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll be around, but, yeah, because I'll be gone.
Just because of closing year end, first of the year.
Yeah, 2nd gets a little tight then afterwards.
Candy, you are on this committee. Do you have any thoughts on any of this? I mean, I feel
Not
like.
December.
No,
just
not
thoughts on
just
the
in
whole.
general. I mean, I realize that I haven't heard
Yeah.
you comment on any of it.
Just kind of take it all in, I haven't actually had to run for an election yet. Next year would be my first,
Well,
My
that's
first
what
go around.
excuse me, but I mean, we're looking at that, that's something to think about. She's not elected, her state's attorney's not elected. You've appointed that lady
Well, yeah, she will be, she'll be up in.
up for election, the next election, so there's things to consider about that too.
Yeah, I mean, Katie's ran for election, what do you think? Do you like having to go through the election process?
Yeah. I mean,
Well, here,
Yeah, Katie.
here it's
excuse me.
not, I haven't had any competition, so I mean, that changes it quite a bit when you don't have any competition. I mean, it makes it, fairly simple, but
but somewhere along the line, you may get that person that
Yeah, well,
that they know everything
yeah.
and.
Well, and that's where my concern
You know.
comes into a point with the elected official status, is that, you know, me being a commissioner, I just have to have a broad idea and knowledge of what's going on. But the people that actually are elected in this building and run stuff on a day-to-day basis really need to know what in the heck they're doing. And we're lucky that we have good elected officials and good staff now that know what they're doing. But you could really say, you could have somebody who goes, oh, I don't like what the so-and-so's doing, and they could run and get elected and walk into the office and have no clue. And boy, would that really throw a monkey wrench into everything in this whole place.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, there are some things that, with respect to the functioning of government, that you don't want to necessarily be a popularity contest. Obviously, you don't want this to be a popularity contest either, but when you have 5 commissioners, the ability for one commissioner who runs because they're popular and wins because they're popular, there's a little bit of damage control and mitigation that the rest of the commission can do, but there's only one auditor.
Yeah,
There's
well,
only one treasurer.
And I think a pretty solid example of that just recently is like Foster County. They got an auditor, and I don't know if you knew her, but they had all kinds of trouble. And the commission wasn't good to start with. That's why they just moved from 3 commissioners to 5, because they had 2 commissioners that basically held illegal meetings and then ganged up on the 3rd guy. And they made decisions before they walked in the room.
Ooh.
But I actually watched their commission meetings, and it was bad, like where 2 of them would tell the auditor off, and then the auditor, one meeting, she just stood up and just walked out and just left, and they just shut the meeting down because there was so much contention. So that, I'm just using it as an example, but if you got the wrong people in the wrong jobs that don't know how to do their job,
Well, I guess that was a good Steel County at the same time.
yeah, still, yeah, they had a similar problem.
Similar problem.
Yeah, in Griggs County, there was a whole other issue there. But that had nothing. That was just, they had to just recall everybody.
Yeah.
So there's, yeah, Steel County was a prime example too, where the auditor, I don't know if it was the auditor or the treasurer, she just wasn't showing up for work and didn't know what the heck she was doing. And so they were basically flying blind without an auditor, I think is what it came down to at that point.
It was Griggs County that was the courthouse deal.
Yeah, that was the courthouse deal, but Steele County went through the similar thing where they had somebody that was elected to be the auditor. I remember what it was now. It was I can't remember if it was a woman or a man, but the person was the treasurer, didn't know what they were doing. They recalled that person, or the commission had the ability somehow through their home rule to basically boot that person out of the position. They turned around and ran for auditor and won, right after the commission had booted that person being their treasurer. And that person was basically, they had booted them because they didn't know what they were doing and they didn't show up at work. So they were stuck with an auditor that hated the commission and was basically just there to have with an axe to grind and didn't know how to do their job. So the bad,
We're talking about the bad.
yeah, there's a
So
lot
that's
of
the
good.
exception, not
That's the
the norm.
exception to the rule.
And
Around here, we've had fantastic officials.
and we've
Well,
been very fortunate.
longevity,
Yeah,
there's a lot
longevity.
of longevity.
Well, that's the thing is we've been lucky that we've had people that work in the office that then step up and take the job.
Yeah.
But if you had somebody, our offices are small enough where it's a 2-person operation where if the person up top wants to retire and the next person has no desire to run the office, you could have somebody that gets elected that has, well, that's a pretty sweet gig. I get health insurance, and it's a pretty good paying gig, and they'll just walk in and get elected and have no clue how the place runs.
Well, I think in the past years, I think, I'm going back 30, 40 years ago, there was that problem too. It's just not today, it happened
No,
back then.
And even in the elected positions like McKenzie County, they tried to remove their sheriff. They had to go all the way to the governor's office. And then the governor removed him for a while, went through the process, put him back into place, and the minute he walked in, 9 deputies quit.
Well, we can't really touch
No,
that.
we
with
can't
this,
touch that either.
but I think that's the point, is that, in 30 to 40 years, if there was real issue, or in 10 or 20, I mean, you have the flexibility to take action, which right now we don't.
Anyway, back to the date.
Right.
Sorry, I guess, I'm just talking.
No.
Well, if we're gonna do possibly a commission meeting on the 3rd, I mean, what is like a Thursday work for, I mean, I can pretty much go whatever, it doesn't matter to me.
And I have a relatively flexible schedule as well.
So, how about you, Paula?
Are we in January?
Yeah, like the 4th of January or something like that.
4th
Well,
of January.
if it's the 4th of January, I'll be gone, I'm gonna be in Washington.
Okay, well,
Or you could, well, the 3rd, like.
yeah, you wanna do the
afternoon.
3rd in the afternoon?
Or will you be gone that day too?
No, I'll be here the 3rd, I just won't be here the 4th.
Okay,
What, the same, this time?
yeah, 3rd in the afternoon.
This time on the 3rd works.
Does that work for you, Rodney?
I guess I'm kind of flexible.
Okay.
Okay, then let's have a vote to set the next meeting for Wednesday, January 3rd at 2 p.m.
I'll make that motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Got a motion and a second to have the next meeting on Wednesday, January 3rd at 2 p.m. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Is there any other business that needs to come before the home rule charter committee?
Like I said, I guess I would like to see more of the other board members here so we get a bigger perspective.
I wish that too.
I mean, I don't want to have to be one of four to come up with this.
I agree. We'll have to hassle them.
I mean, it's a commitment,
Well, you've seen me in this seat every one of these meetings.
I know, but I mean, like I said when I accepted this job, I like to see everybody here because it's an important piece of business that's got to be taken care of.
I agree with you.
And there's nothing we can do. If they don't want to take part, I guess they don't want to take part.
So, we just have to hassle them more and make sure, you know, maybe a second reminder or something like that. You know, I realize people get busy, but at the same time, yeah, you made a commitment. I guess I'm of the opinion, I agree with you, that the point that I think more voices in the room are gonna make a stronger document. Because
Absolutely.
disagreement and then working through that process and then coming to an agreement is gonna make a stronger document. Instead of, you know, just a few of us deciding, this is all it's gonna be, you know.
Yeah, because after all, you know, when it goes before the vote, if there's just four of us, we're gonna have to take the heat for it.
When you don't have to backtrack, because, you know, so-and-so wasn't here, and then you made a decision, we're gonna put this in, and then they come to the next one and say, well, wait a minute, why are you putting that in? And you're constantly going back,
Right.
trying to explain
that's a good
yourself.
point.
You need to, you want to have a unified face when we come to the community, right? You want to make sure that everybody feels like they were heard.
Yeah, and even if there's disagreements on certain portions of it, as long as you felt like you were heard, we have to all be on the same page as a unified front that, and you know, like I said, maybe we'll come through this whole thing and we'll decide that, you know, we'll vote to push it to the commission and maybe we'll say, no, it's just something we don't feel we need, but if that's the case, that's the case. If it's still a unified front, we still have the discussions.
Yeah,
But more people, yeah, everybody needs to be here. I'm gonna make a note, January 3rd.
Katie, visitors and delegations? You have anything you'd like to say?
She's just here to listen.
Okay,
I'm just following the process.
excellent. Well, if there's no more business to come before,
should this be advertised in the paper, like the county commissioner meetings? That this is a home rule charter meeting?
The agenda is sent to the paper, whether they choose to put it in there or not.
Do they put in our agendas?
no.
No,
But they just put that little thing up in the corner
They just put a
pocket.
little,
Well, can we ask, I don't think it'd be hard to ask Louise to just say, can we just put it up in that little
you
corner?
know, because
pocket
whenever
there?
I send out everything, she is part of that
But I mean,
and gets the,
let people know what's,
Just that, like that little reminder that the Ramsey County Home Rule Charter Commission meets at 2 p.m. on the 3rd, you know, if we
same
can.
as what you
Yeah.
people.
Yeah,
Is it
sure.
on the website
I-
calendar?
The website has.
The website has it, and we
Yeah.
have a calendar there and everything, but, you know, people in the paper, so.
like
Sure,
in the newspaper,
and
it's over on the
I
side.
try to mention it at the commission
Yeah.
meetings, and I mention it to people that I meet on the street, but I can't force the newspaper to print anything either.
Not unless you pay them.
I suppose that's true.
Well, you might want to consider an evening meeting
Yeah.
if
we're
you're
trying
wanting
to
the
get-
public
Well,
to
and
come.
I think that is something that we'll definitely want to look at once we get a document. I mean, what, you know, once we're in the process of actually having something substantial to show people.
Yeah, then those are gonna have to be in the evening when people can actually attend.
When they
and-
can
and-
come, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I would entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So, second.
We stand adjourned.